In this video, I'm going to show you everything you need to know about generating PDFs in your Bubble app. We're going to go through 3 examples. The first one is a really simple invoice. You can see here I've built out an invoice on my Bubble app. And when I click on this Create PDF button, you'll see we're able to download that directly in our browser and then view it straight away. Our second example is going to be a bit more of a complex invoice. So you can see here it's quite similar to the first one, but actually contains a number of repeating groups and it's going to be split across more than one page. But when we click on Create PDF, you can see it's downloaded once again, and we get this really nicely formatted PDF where it's split neatly across the 2 pages. So we'll go through how to build that out. Our final example is going to be a custom sales report with headers and footers. You'll see here when we click on the Open Report button, we're presented with this nicely formatted report covering various territories. And when we click on Download PDF, we're going to get that downloaded in our browser. And you'll see we have a header with the company logo. And we also have a footer with internal use only and the page number marked on each page. Throughout this tutorial, I'm going to be using the PDF Creator plugin. It's a plugin I've developed myself, and as of the time of recording, it's been used in just under 200 Bubble applications. You can see here it comes with a detailed list of what you can achieve. There is a demo page that actually goes through some sample workflows in terms of how you generate PDFs, and there's also some pretty detailed instructions for specific use cases. The editor for the demo app is open, so you can take a look at that as well. It's really easy to install the PDF Creator plugin. I already have it installed here, but what you need to do is click on Add Plugins, search for PDF Creator, and it should show up there. You can either purchase a lifetime license or subscribe to it on a monthly basis. In order to access the workflow actions that come with the PDF Creator plugin, you're going to need to drop the PDF Creator element somewhere on your page. While this element is showing up while we're on our design tab, it's not actually going to be visible to the end user. That said, you do need to leave this box here, which says this element is visible on page load, as ticked. If you untick that, the plugin will not function correctly, and you'll get a bunch of errors when you try to run the associated workflow actions. I typically stick this element down the bottom of my page. Now that we've dropped the PDF Creator element onto the page, we need to take one more step before we actually go about building the workflows associated with generating PDFs, and that's we need to enable the ability to add ID attributes to elements. And you can see here from the instructions that we need to go to Settings and then General. So Settings, General, and then if we scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see here under Advanced Options, there is the option to expose the option to add an ID attribute to HTML elements. You're going to need to tick that box, and then we're good to go. Now, let's start off our examples by creating a PDF of a really simple invoice. So you can see here I've created a group that has a bunch of other groups within it, all static data in this example. We'll go on to more complex ones involving repeating groups later, but we want to generate a PDF of this invoice. And you can see here from the instructions, it's pretty easy. All we need to do is add an ID attribute to the group invoice element. That's that group here. And the way we can find the ID attribute input field is if we scroll down to the bottom of the Appearance tab, you'll see here we have ID attribute, and I'm just going to assign this the ID attribute my invoice. Then we need to link the Generate PDF Creator workflow action to a button and use the ID attribute to target this specific group. So let's get a button and drop that on our canvas, and we'll call this Create PDF, and then we'll go to Add Workflow, and we'll click here to add an action. And if we scroll down to Element Actions, you'll see because we've installed the PDF Creator plugin, we have this action, Generate a PDF Creator. Now, we're going to get started really quickly here, and there's only 2 fields we actually need to fill out straight away. The first one is the ID attribute field. So this is the ID attribute of the element that we're looking to generate a PDF of. And you might remember we assigned the ID attribute my invoice to our group that contained the invoice. Second mandatory field we need to fill out to get up and running quickly is the scale field here. You can read fully about it under the show documentation button, but essentially this decides on the quality of the file. I usually recommend starting off with 2, just to give you a sense of the scale. 1 is the lowest quality, 10 is the highest, but the trade-off between high and low quality files is that the higher the number you set, the higher the quality, but also the larger the file size and the longer it will take to generate that PDF. So you can adjust this as you wish, but I do usually recommend starting off with 2 and then adjusting from there. So let's generate our super basic invoice PDF. And we scroll down to that create PDF button and click on that. You'll see here I'm getting a download in my browser, and if I click on that, we have our PDF of our simple invoice. There's a bunch of customization options that we can use, and I'm going to go through some of them now. The first one is the file name. You can see by default it's set to my file, but let's say we wanted to say invoice and then put in some dynamic data. So we could say invoice and then the current date and time. Let's format it in a specific manner. Let's go with that format there. And now if we generate a PDF, we should get the file name with a dynamic date in it. So let's click on create PDF. And you can see there, the name of the file is now invoice January 17th, 2024. So as I mentioned, this scale value here is going to decide on the quality and size of the file. Just to show you the difference in quality, I'm going to up this to 10, which is a maximum permitted quality. And then we'll click on create PDF again. And you can see, you might have noticed it took even a small bit longer. And if we look at the difference in the file sizes here, you can see it's quite significant, nearly 10 times as large in terms of the file size itself. And maybe just comparing the quality, this was the original one we created that had a scale factor of 2. And then if we go to the more recent one, that has a quality with a scale factor of 10. I'm going to flick between the two of these quickly, and there is a difference, but it's not really that noticeable, which is why I do recommend you start off with a lower value and then upgrade if you wish. I'm going to set that value back to 2 for now. So let's do that. Next up is the layout of the PDF. I'm going to come back to these two sections in a minute, but moving on to the layout for now, you can see here for orientation, portrait is the default option, but I can also type in landscape. You must choose one of these values or else the workflow will not function properly. But let's just take it our orientation when we're using landscape. Create that, open it up, and you can see here we're using landscape for the PDF orientation now. And this is actually a good time to go through how the PDF Creator plugin scales elements from the bubble canvas onto the PDF itself. Because if we look at our bubble application, you'll see here this looks like a kind of typical, portrait style page, but when we look at what's been output, it's stretching to fill up the entire width of the landscape PDF. And I might just change the background color of this group just to make it more obvious as I go through a few examples involving that. So if we go into our group PDF, I'm just going to change this to a slightly gray color. And we'll leave it like that, and we'll generate another PDF. And open it up. And you can see again that it's scaling to fit the entire width of the page, although not quite the height. And the reason that's happening is because if we look at our group invoice, which is the target element here, you'll see under layout that the maximum width is set to infinity. So if given the space, this element is going to spread out and take up the entire width of the canvas. In reality, on our bubble application, it's been limited by its parent group, where I'm setting a max width of 720. But the PDF Creator plugin isn't bothered by that. It's really focused on the max width of the element itself. Now, it will stop. You'll notice that it's not putting it out to over the edges of the page, but it is filling up as much of the PDF canvas as it can. However, if I set the max width of this element to 720, we're not actually going to notice any difference in our bubble application because the parent group is also set to a max width of 720. But if I generate a PDF now, what we'll see is that it's not taking up the full width of the page. And if I use my screenshotting tool here, this is really handy. It tracks the kind of pixels on screen. And if I go from one edge of the invoice to the other, it might be difficult for you to see there, but that's coming in at about 720 pixels. So that's how the PDF Creator decides on how wide to make the element when it's adding it to the PDF. might just change it back to a portrait orientation for a minute and refresh that, get rid of the existing ones. And I'm expecting this to take up most of the width of the page, but not quite all of it. So if we click on that, yeah, so you can see here again, this is going to be about 720 pixels wide. Do a quick look at that. But the reason it's not taking up the full width of the page is because at the moment I am using an A4 format. And you can see here there's a bunch of different sizes you can use. You can even use your own custom format. But if we're using an A4 page format, then we can see the dimensions for that underneath here. And apologies that the list isn't the easiest to read. That's just the best way I could get it into the plugin. Unfortunately, Bubble doesn't allow you to format it on separate lines. But we can see here under A4, 794, that's the width of it. And then 1123 is the height of it. So because we've limited our group there to 720 pixels, you can see that it's not taking up the full 794 pixels that an A4 page has. Now, if I set the min width of this element to be, let's say, 900 pixels, and the max width I left as infinite, and then I might just take off the max width on the parent group as well. This time, if I generate a PDF, it's actually going to go out beyond the page. So you can see here it's taking up a much wider space in our Bubble app. And if we click on Create PDF, the PDF this time is going out beyond the edge of the page. So this obviously isn't what we want, but that will happen if you use a min width that is greater than the size of the page you're using for the PDF itself. One more thing to go through in terms of how the PDF Creator plugin scales elements onto the PDF. So I'm just going to undo those changes I made. And we now have, let's set that max width to be infinite. And I want to talk about how the plugin works if you're on different screen sizes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to right click and go to inspect. And you can see here, I'm going to go on to an iPhone size screen width. And there's a couple of things to note here. First of all, I've done a terrible job of making this particular PDF responsive. You can see here it does not format correctly if we're looking at it on mobile. But I just want to highlight what happens if you're on a smaller screen size and generating PDF. What's actually going to happen is it's going to be formatted correctly. And if we open that up, you'll see we're getting it scaled appropriately. And the reason that's happening is because, again, we're not taking the width of the element on screen. The plugin is taking the kind of CSS style associated with the specific element, and its max width is infinite at the moment. Therefore, it's going to take up as much space as it can on the PDF canvas, and we'll actually end up with a nicely formatted PDF. A quick note maybe on the custom dimensions option. So going back again to our workflow, you can see here we have a lot of the standard style formats, and then down at the very end we have custom. And if you tick custom, what you can do is you can put in your own custom dimensions here, and the syntax you're going to want to use is the width of the PDF. So let's go with 400, and then the height of the PDF, we'll go with 800. And that'll actually get us to those specific dimensions. Exit out of that. We'll get a slightly different size PDF, as you can see here. So that can be useful if you're targeting very specific dimensions for whatever use case you're going after. You can also set custom margins. So let's just set this back to A4 and get rid of that. But you can see here we've top left, bottom right margins that we can set. So let's say I wanted to set a margin of 40 pixels on each of the sides and at the top and the bottom. This time when we generate our PDF, I'm expecting to see a white space at either side of the invoice element. And if we open that up, you can see that's exactly what's happening. So in my case, it wasn't really necessary because I'd actually built in the margins or padding at the side and the bottom top of the invoice element itself. But if these elements here were hugging the side of the container, it could be useful to put in some margins just to give it a bit of room to breathe. Now, you'll note that every time we've been creating a PDF so far, it's been popping in to our browser download section here, and I've been able to open it up. But there was another option earlier on in our set of options, and that was this save to database option. So it's just there under auto download. Maybe first, actually, if you set auto download to no, and then you generate the PDF, it's not actually going to download in your browser like we've been doing previously. But you can see something happened there. You might have seen the load bar just happen at the top of the screen. And what's happening there was we were saving down the PDF to our database. I'm going to leave auto download as no for a minute, but leave save to database as yes. And if we take a quick look at our database, you may be disappointed to see we don't have any sign of the PDFs that we've created in app data. But where we can find them is in this file manager section. If we click on this, you'll see here's a bunch of PDFs that we've created with the custom name that we assigned. And if we click on these, you'll see they open up. So we are saving these PDFs down to our Bubble database, but what we're not doing is we're not making them accessible to users because they can't access them if they're only here in File Manager. We need somehow to link it to a specific data type, and then users will be able to access them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a data type called saved reports. I'm going to create that, and then I'm going to add a new field to it called link to report. We'll make that a text field. And the natural thing to do here would be, I guess, once the generate PDF creator action has finished, the next thing you might want to do is go to create a new thing, create a saved report. And then what you can do is you can say the link to report equals, you want to find the PDF creator element that you dropped on screen. So if I just type in PDF, you can see it's here, PDF creator A. If you click on that, you will have access to that URL in the element itself. So ideally, we'd be creating a new saved report, and then we'd be creating a link to it via the URL that's under the PDF creator element. But this is not going to work perfectly. And I'm just going to show you now for demonstration purposes. If we generate that PDF, we can see here something's happening in the background. If we go into our Bubble database and click on File Manager, maybe just refresh this. You can see the last one was at 12:15. And if we refresh, yeah, there's a new one now at 12:18. But if we go to app data and click on saved reports, we do have a new entry, but you can see there the link to the report is actually empty. So this hasn't worked. And the reason this hasn't worked is you may have noted when we were generating the PDFs and saving them down to our databases, there was a load bar coming up there. And it took a few seconds for Bubble to save down the PDF to our database. And what happened was we essentially created this new thing before the PDF had been saved down, and we couldn't get a link to it because we hadn't actually saved down the report before adding the link to the new thing. So the way to get around this, and a much more robust solution, is if we delete this here. So what we can do then is go to click here to add an event, click on the a PDF creator saved to database element. And what's happening here is this event is going to trigger something every single time we save a PDF to our database. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to say create a new thing. We're going to create a new saved report. And the link to that report is going to be equal to PDF creator A, its URL. So let's try that again. I might just get rid of the color that I did set on this. Click on black color, set it to white, and let's refresh our Bubble application. Create the PDF. Nothing being downloaded because we set auto download to no. But if we look at our database this time, you can see here we have a new entry and we have a link to a report that looks promising. If we click on this, copy it and paste it in here, you'll see here we have our saved down invoice. So that is a way to allow users to access reports or other PDFs that you've created. And just to really kind of hammer home how you could do this, you could, let's just grab this, copy it, paste it, and we will put a repeating group in there just to show how you can actually let users access some of the elements, or PDFs, I should say. So let's get rid of that. Maybe just set the min height first, something we can work with. get rid of that. And if we go to repeating group, put that in there, get rid of that button. And we're going to set the type of content on this repeating group to be saved reports. We'll simply do a search for all saved reports. We won't have a fixed number of rows. And then what we'll do is in each one, we're going to put in a link. And the link is just going to go to an external URL. And the external URL is going to be equal to the current cell's saved reports link to report. And then we can put in open report. And hopefully now we should be able to open this invoice via one of the entries in the repeating group. So let's click on that. And that hasn't worked because I'm guessing that was the one where we did not have a report saved down. If we click on the second one, we can indeed open that up. So just to clarify, the first one didn't work because it was this blank entry here, which I might as well delete. Whereas we can open up a saved down PDF via this link here for the other entry that we did. Let's now move on to our second example. And on the face of it, this looks quite similar to what we just did. We're creating a PDF of an invoice, but this one's a bit more complex. If you scroll down here, you'll see that we have three separate sections to the invoice. We have materials, and you can see there's a number of different line items there. There's labor, and again, a number of different line items. And finally, other. So it's a bit of a longer PDF, and these are actually repeating groups underneath the hood here. Might actually be a good idea to just look at the setup here. We have our group invoice again, but you can see here, if we go to the parent element of that particular group, we have a repeating group where we're searching for this data type called invoice items, and we're getting all the invoice items where the category is equal to materials. Just to show you that it looks in our database, under the invoice item data type, we have a category with cost, description, and quantity. So when I go into my invoice items here, you'll see here, for example, the first entry is under the labor category. It has a cost, a description, a quantity, and all of that feeds through to the various line items. If we're using a constraint here, it's limited to materials. We're doing something very similar on the other two repeating groups. For the labor one, if I go to that particular repeating group, you'll see here restricting it to those where the category is equal to labor. So I have a button down here, and I'm going to click on that. And we will see that we have another generate PDF creator. We're taking the my invoice ID attribute, which is assigned to the entire group invoice. So let's generate that. But before we do, what I'm going to do, just so you can see for demonstration purposes the difference it makes, I'm going to set this page break to no. So let's refresh our bubble app. And if we scroll down, we can see those repeating groups have loaded in. And if we click on create PDF, you'll see here we've got this out, and it's not great because we have the page break set to no, which means that the PDF plugin is making no attempt to try and draw page breaks between various different elements, and we get this not so welcome behavior where it's cut off at the bottom of one PDF page and the top of the other. So let's change that page break from no to yes and see how it looks. This still isn't going to be exactly what we want, but it's going to be a step in the right direction at least. So we're going to click on create PDF again. It'll download into our browser. And when we open up this time, if we scroll to the bottom of the first page, this at least looks a bit better in the sense that we don't have any elements that are halfway between one page and halfway between another. But obviously you have this big white space at the top, and that's not what we want either. Just to give you context on what's happening here, when the page break is set to yes, the plugin is going to break it so that no element is overlapping on the page break, but it also wants the elements to be continuous. It doesn't want a gap in between materials and labor. So that's why it's pushing this part of the invoice down so that it's directly followed by labor section. But again, that's not really what we want, but we can fix this. What we can do is, rather than just put in my invoice as the ID attribute for the element to PDF, is we can break our invoice up into several different sections. Let me show you what I mean. If we go back and we click on this section here, which is kind of the header section, and if we go down and we call this invoice header, and let's copy that, and then instead of generating a PDF of my invoice, we're going to put an invoice header. Next, we're going to go down to the materials section here, and I'm going to put in, you can see materials here, the attribute is already in there, so we're going to use that, and I'm going to paste it in to my ID attributes. Now, the syntax here is important. If you're using multiple ID attributes, which is what we're going to do, you need to put in a comma after the first one, a space, and then the next ID attribute. We're going to build out the full invoice, but let's just refresh and see what we've got so far. We scroll down, create a PDF, and you can see here now we have the header and we have the materials section. You can see there that they're hugging the edges of the PDF, and the reason that's happening is because if you think about it, previously we would have been using the group invoice and the padding was built into it, but now we're using this group here where there is no padding. So what you can do to make that look a bit better is on our workflow, we can add in some margins on the left and the right. So let's do that. We'll put in, say, 30 on the left and also 30 on the right. And we're also going to add in our other sections. So we've added materials. Let's add in labor. You can see that has no ID attribute, but we'll add one in. We'll just call it labor. We'll call the other section other. And we'll call this section down the end here the footer. And then if we go back to the workflow associated with the create PDF button, we have invoice header and materials in. We'll now put in labor, other, and footer. And let's refresh our bubble app. Scroll down to the end and create the PDF. Open that up. And this is looking better. There's a bit of a white space here, but it is looking a lot better than it did. We're not getting any issues with elements overlapping between one page and another, but I would like to get it a bit neater in the sense that we still have this bit of a white space at the end of the first page. And the solution when you come across a white space like this is nearly always to go one layer deeper. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think about it, at the very beginning, we were creating a PDF of this entire group here. We then moved on to breaking it up into this particular one and this particular group and this particular group. So now what we're going to do is we're going to break it down even one level further, and particularly for the labor group, because if you look at our PDF, you'll see here everything's fine for materials, but it's the labor group here that's kind of prematurely been put on the next page. So if you can divide this up into smaller chunks, then we may be able to get this up and have it a bit more neatly spaced. So what I'm going to do is, instead of having labor here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our design tab and I'm going to divide our labor group into 3 smaller chunks. The first one is going to be this text element here. So I'm going to call this labor title. The second one is going to be this kind of header section here, and I'm going to call this labor header. And then finally the repeating group, which is actually the parent element of this group here, I'm going to call this labor body. And then if we go back to our workflow, I'm going to replace labor with those 3 elements. So we'll go for labor title, labor header, and labor body. And just make sure our syntax there is okay. Yep, that looks good. So let's refresh our editor, or our page I should say, one more time. And then create our PDF once again. And this time, start of it's looking fine. Okay, we're getting closer. We can see now that the title and the header section have been moved up to the next page, which is what we want. But what we don't really want is having the first entry of the repeating group being on the next page. Ideally, we'd probably have maybe 3 or 4 of the line items up here and then the rest of them on the next page. And I suppose an issue that you might think will arise now is we've already broken down these elements as far as we can. You can't really get any further down than a text element, than that group element here, or particularly the repeating group. But the plugin does come with some functionality that actually allows us to break this repeating group up into multiple subgroups. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our repeating group, which is this one here, and we're going to put these square brackets around the ID attribute here. And this is going to signify to the plugin that this element should be broken down into further smaller chunks. Now, we've put square brackets on the ID attribute on the element itself. We're also going to need to put those square brackets in the ID attributes on the workflow action. So we only need to do it for the labor body section. And let's try that now. Create our PDF once more. Scrolling down, and yeah, this is much neater this time. You can see we're getting those 5-line items on one page, and it's breaking neatly onto the next page with no elements overlapping on 2 pages. So that's how you generate PDFs of kind of more complex reports that may be over a number of pages or may contain repeating groups. I think it's a good illustration of how to do that. Now, we were using multiple ID attributes here, and they were all kind of from the same master element. They were all in this group invoice here. You don't need to have all the ID attributes to be from the same one. What I'm trying to kind of get across is you can mix and match elements from different parts of your bubble application. So for example, if we were to get a group and drop that down the bottom of our page, way away from anything else, and just drop some text in it. I'm not quite sure where that's gone. Up here, put that in that. And we'll just call this group test. And we'll put a border around it just to signify that it's something a bit different. And then if we go back to our workflow here, you can see at the moment we have all of these. What we could do is we just, for example, take the header and then also add in group test. And we should be able to generate a PDF with the header on top and then this below it, because it is going to go sequentially depending on which order you put the element ID attributes in. So just to show you how that works, let's create a PDF again. And again, we have a header section first, and then that group test ID attribute that we also put in, which represents this group down here. So you can really mix and match elements from anywhere on your bubble editor. I will say you do need the elements to be visible on your bubble page for the plugin to work. So for example, if I took that group that we just added and I unticked that this element is visible on page load, and I collapsed it so it's not going to be visible when we refresh our application, this isn't going to work. We need the element to be on the page to generate a PDF of it. So if I click this, you see there we're getting an error code because the element is not visible. I'm just going to undo the various ID attributes here so we go back to what we had a second ago with the more complex one. And I just wanted to talk briefly about kind of how to give the best user experience when people are generating PDFs. And one of the things I've often seen is that people don't really want to have a PDF like this on their page. They may prefer to hide it somewhere else, or not necessarily hide it, but maybe have the user trigger something else and then it appears. So what I often see people doing is they may have something like a view invoice button, where if you click on that, you're displayed the invoice, and this is just a pop-up element. This is exactly the same group invoice inside it. And then in this pop-up, there might be a download PDF button. So if I click that, I'm going to get exactly the same thing. And you can see there we have our invoice, which is nicely formatted. So that's just one way I've seen kind of people give a better user experience for those end users that are using the PDF Creator plugin. Another thing I've seen people do, which I quite like, is rather than it downloading directly into the browser or being saved to the database and you'd be shown a link to it in a repeating group, what I've seen some people do is use pop-ups to kind of present the option for users to see a link to the PDF. I'm just going to delete this group and to show you how that might work. I'm going to search for elements. I'm going to search for another pop-up. I'm going to make it quite small. I'm just going to call this pop-up PDF link. And what we're going to do is we're just going to get a text element here and say view the PDF. And then what I'm going to do is just change the layout of this a bit to make it a bit neater. Put this here in the center, and also on the pop-up itself, put that there. We're not going to make it a fixed width, but we will say fit width to content, and we will not set a min height on that. And then what we can do is we can add a link in here. So if we search our elements for link, get that. I'm just going to drop that there. We're going to group the two of these in a row container. And we're going to make this the next one. And then what we're going to say is we're going to set the link destination to be an external URL. And if we search for PDF Create Array, its URL, this is going to allow the user to access that URL that we've created when we generated a PDF. And then what we can do is we can open it in a new tab. We can change the style slightly maybe to make it match this a bit better. So we have 16 say, and when we put in a space as well just before it to give a bit of room to breathe. And what we can do then is this pop is called popup PDF link. We can go to our workflow tab and we can say when PDF Creator A is saved to the database, we're already creating a new saved report, much like we did in the previous example. But now what we can do as well is we can show an element and we can show popup PDF link. So now if we refresh our bubble application, we scroll down and we say create PDF. You can see it's been saved to the database, and then a pop-up gets presented, and we can click on that, and that's another way to allow users to access the PDF that you've generated. The final example we're going to go through is how you create a PDF of a custom report with headers and footers. If I click on this button, I'm going to be shown a pop-up that has a report for the East Territory for a particular company. We can see who the report has been prepared by, a chart with some statistics, and then also a brief comment on the month. And if we scroll down, there's actually 3 more similar sections, one for the West Territory, one for the North Territory, and finally one for the South Territory. And if we look at the workflow that's associated with this download PDF button, it's quite simple. You'll see here we're using the generate PDF creator A action again, and I've broken it down into 4 different sub-reports. So for example, on the very first one, I've given this the ID attribute sales report 1, second is going to be sales report 2, and so on. So let's test it out and see how it looks. I'm going to click on download PDF, and you can see that's been downloaded. And we get this kind of nice summary of the various territories. But you might have noticed that took a bit longer than some of the other reports we've generated. And one of the reasons that is the case is because there's a bit more going on. First of all, we have these chart elements which are taking up a bit more size in terms of the file size. And you can see here under scale, I set it to 4. Previously we had it as 2. We set it as 4, it's going to be a bit higher quality, which means it will take longer to generate. And that can be seen in the file size there, 3.3 megabytes, not massive, but not nothing either. So that was one of the reasons it took a bit longer. And it can be a bit frustrating for the user if they're waiting for a report to be generated and they're not quite sure if anything's happening. So what we're going to do is we're going to implement a loading screen before we get on to adding headers and footers. And the way I like to do that is if we go back to our design tab, and if we go down to our floating groups, we're going to drag one of these onto our canvas. And we might just leave that there. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the container layout to be column. We're going to unset the fixed width, and we're going to unset the fit height to content. So this floating group is now taking up the entire page. We're going to change the appearance of it a bit. What we're going to do is we're going to attach the kind of style that's there by default, and we're going to change the background style to be that of a gradient. Starting color is going to be just black, so we'll put in our zeros, and then our ending color will go with this color that comes with the bubble presets, and we'll set the opacity there to be 40. So then if we scroll down, you can see down towards the very end it becomes a bit more transparent, and that's still probably a bit dark. Let's actually change the transparency on the first color also to 40. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get a text element, and we're going to drop this in our floating group. We're going to put this in the middle. We're just going to say loading. We'll change the style a bit, change the color to white, make it a bit bigger, put it in the center there, and do the fixed width and the min height. And then importantly, we're going to put it in the center of our floating group, so you can see it's going down here. Now, it seems like it's way too low at the moment. This isn't actually in reality going to be where it is, as we'll see in a minute. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to add in an icon, and I'm going to put that there, and I'm going to search for the spinner icon, which is this one here, and then I'm going to click on make the icon rotate, change that color to white, and we're also going to put that in the center of our page, and we'll put down next. And we can see we have an error here, so let me just check what that is. Floating group must be right under the undefined, instead is under group main container. So I think what I did there was I should have put the floating group on the page itself. But what we can do is we can just cut that and click on page and paste it in, and that'll get rid of our error. And then what we're going to do is when we are generating our PDF, we're going to trigger this floating group to be seen. So what I'm actually going to do first of all is I'm going to go to this element is visible on page load for our floating group. I'm going to untick that. And then if we go back to our pop-up container, and if we look on the workflow associated with download PDF, we're going to generate the PDF creator. Then we're going to hide the pop-up that the report is in, which is the pop-up container. And then we're going to show an element, and the element we're going to show is the floating group. So let's try that out. We're going to have to make another change in a second, but just a good way to test it with what we have. So let's open our report, download our PDF, which is going to take a second. The pop-up is closed, and then the floating group is shown. Our PDF has been downloaded. And one final step we need to take is to hide the floating group once the PDF has been downloaded, because we no longer want to show this now, and we can't actually do anything else on the page. So what we can do is we can click here to add an event. We can say when a PDF creator downloaded, we're then going to hide an element, and the element we're going to hide is our floating group. So let's try that one more time. Open our report up, download the PDF, and then once our report gets downloaded, you can see there that our floating group has gone away. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to add headers and footers to our PDF. So let's say that we wanted to keep our report confidential, and let's just open it up here, and you wanted to put something down the bottom that said internal use only. Well, that's actually quite easy to do with the PDF Creator plugin. What we can do is when we are using our generate PDF Creator action, you'll see here there's a section down the bottom for footer and then also for header. We'll focus on the footer first of all and come back to the header part shortly. We have two fields we can put some content in. We have the left footer content and the right footer content fields. And I'm going to put in the right footer content in capital letters, internal use only. And now if we generate another PDF, and what I might do is just for the sake of saving a bit of time, I'm going to set the quality of this down to 2, just so it gets generated a bit more quickly. Let's open our report and download our PDF. And you can see the smaller size because I've reduced the scale value down to 2. But this time, if we scroll to the bottom of our report, what we'll see is we have this internal use only on the bottom right hand corner, and it's on every page. So that can be useful. You might want to put in your company name or something like that. But another thing you might want to do is put in the page counter. It's not going to be a huge issue given we only have 4 pages in this particular report. But if you had a lengthier report, you may want to keep track of what page you're on. And again, the plugin makes this really easy to do. What you can do is go back down to our footer section. And in the left footer content, I'm just going to type in the words page dash counter. And this is a special instruction to the plugin. That means it's going to count the number of pages in the PDF and then add numbers that are associated with whatever page it's on. So again, let's try it. Open our report and download our PDF. Now we open it up, and this time down the bottom we have our internal use only, and then on the left hand side it's quite faint, but you can see it there, 1. If we go down here we have 2, and if we go down here we have 3. One more thing we can do in the footer if we wish, which is we can also add in a line, sometimes just to distinguish what's the footer and what's not. You'll see there's also the options here for the font size, for the text, and the bottom margin and the left and right hand margin. You can play around with them if you want. I'm not going to do so now, but as the name suggests, they change the size of the font and the margins in the footer. But let's see how our report looks when we have the line in the footer. Open that up. And yeah, you can see we have our line here this time, just to distinguish that this is indeed footer content. So that's how you add a footer. Let's think about how we want to add a header right now. So let's say you wanted to add maybe the company logo and the date or the month of the report in the header. What you could do is go back to your generate PDF creator action. And let's say we wanted to get a logo that's going to appear in the top left-hand side of our sales report. What we can do is under header, we want to put in something that tells the plugin to put an image in the left header content field. But what we need to do first is actually upload an image. You can see here there's a specific section on uploading an image that you can use in the header or indeed the footer if you wanted to. At the current time, it only supports PNG and JPEGs, so SVG images not supported, but let's upload an image. Okay, so I've just uploaded the Cranford Tech logo, and what is important is that the width and the height fields here are filled out. And you can see from the documentation, this is just describing how wide you want the image to be in pixels on the PDF and in the height as well for this particular field. And I do recommend you make these fields match the exact dimensions of the image you've uploaded. So I know for a fact this image is 120 pixels wide and 40 pixels high. So that's what I'm going to put in there. And then what you're going to need to do is in the left header content, which is where we want the logos to be displayed, simply type in my image. This is another one of those special instructions that are programmed into the plugin so that it knows that if my image is typed in, it's simply going to grab the image we've uploaded and add it into our PDF. So let's see how that looks next. Open our report, download our PDF. And we can see here we do have our logo on the top left. We still have our footer as well, and it's on every page, which is what we want, but what's obviously not ideal is that it's overlapping with the text. So what you can do to avoid that is play around with the top margin. You know, if I know this particular logo is going to be 40 pixels high, and I also know that we have a top margin of 20 pixels, that's going to mean at the very least I want the top margin of 60 pixels. In reality, I probably want a bit more space just so we can breathe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the top margin here to equals 90 pixels. So let's refresh that. Open our report up and download our PDF. And then open that up. And you can see there that looks a lot more in line with what we'd want. We have the logo, we scroll down, we have plenty of space in between that. So that works out quite well. Let's add in finally the month of the report in the top right header content field. So what we can do is we can go down here, and if we go to right header content, let's insert some dynamic data. And I'm going to search for the current date and time. And I'm going to click on this formatted as. And there's a bunch of different types you could use. You could use today's date, but this is January's report. So I want to try and get something that signifies it's only for January. So what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to go to custom. And then I'm just going to type in month, or MM, I should say. So let's see how that looks. Open our report up, download our PDF. And we can see that we have January in the top right-hand corner. So that's it for this tutorial. I hope this has been useful. If you do have any other questions, you can let me know in the comment section.